Imagine the pain. Really try. A bone in your leg, snapped clean through, the jagged end pushing against the skin from the inside. An arrow buried deep in your shoulder, barbed, so that pulling it out will tear more than it went in. A wound on your arm that has gone from red to hot to green to black and is starting to smell. Or a headache. A crushing, blinding, endless headache that has not stopped for weeks, that is slowly driving you out of your own mind. Now take away the hospital. Take away the ambulance, the painkillers, the antibiotics, the clean white sheets, the surgeon who trained for a decade, the machine that breathes for you while you sleep. Take away the very idea of a germ. There is none of that. There is only you and your pain and a person crouching beside you in the firelight, someone your people trust, holding a blade of sharpened stone, who is about to try to save your life by cutting into your body. So here is the question, and it is not for the faint of heart. How did ancient humans survive surgery? How did they cut, drill, saw, and stitch into living human bodies with no anesthetic, no antiseptic, and no idea what was actually killing their patients? And, astonishingly, how did so many of those patients live? Because that is the part that stops you cold. They did not just try. They succeeded. Again and again, across the whole ancient world, we dig up the bones of people who were operated on with stone tools tens of thousands of years ago. And the bones have healed. And a healed bone can only mean one thing. The patient lived. Let's start with the most unbelievable operation of them all. Because ancient humans, it turns out, would drill a hole in your skull. On purpose, while you were alive. And this was not rare. It is called trepanation, and it may be the oldest surgery on Earth. All over the world, in France, in Peru, in China, in Africa, archaeologists keep finding ancient skulls with neat holes cut deliberately into them. Not from a wound, not from a weapon. Carefully made openings, scraped or drilled or cut into the living bone of the head. Some of them more than 7,000 years old, a few possibly far older. Thousands of these skulls have been found. In some ancient burial sites, a startling number of the skulls have been trepanned. This was, in places, almost routine. And your first thought is the obvious one. Surely nobody survived having a hole cut in their head with a piece of flint. And here is the astonishing truth. Most of them did. Because when scientists examine these skulls, they find around the edges of the hole the unmistakable signs of healing. Bone that has grown and smoothed and remodeled itself over months and years. The person did not die on the table. They got up and they lived, sometimes for decades. Some skulls have 2 holes, or 3, or 5, all healed, meaning the same person was trepanned again and again over a lifetime and survived every single time. The survival rate for this Stone Age brain surgery may have been better than surgery in European hospitals as recently as the 1700s and 1800s. In one region of ancient Peru, where trepanation was practiced for centuries, researchers studied hundreds of skulls and watched the healers get better and better at it over time. Until, in the final period, the survival rate may have reached as high as 80 or 90%. 80%. Brain surgery, high in the Andes, long before the microscope, with tools of bronze and stone and volcanic glass, and 4 out of 5 patients walked away. These were not lucky butchers. They were skilled, practicing, improving surgeons, refining a craft across generations. So why on earth would they do it? We can't be fully certain, but the reasons seem to have been both practical and spiritual. On the practical side, a blow to the head, from a club, a fall, a rock, can cause the brain to swell and bleed inside the skull, and that pressure will kill you. Cutting a hole to release that pressure is a real, genuine, life-saving operation, one that modern surgeons still perform today. Many trepanned skulls show signs of exactly this kind of injury, right next to the hole. These ancient surgeons may have worked out, through untold generations of trial and horror, that opening the skull could save a person after a bad knock to the head. And on the other side, there was the war against the invisible. Ancient people believed that headaches, seizures, fits, and madness were caused by evil spirits or demons trapped inside the skull. And if a demon is trapped in your head, the solution is obvious and terrible. You open a door and you let it out. To an ancient healer, cutting a hole to release a tormenting spirit was not butchery. It was mercy. It was a cure. Now hold on to how they actually did this, because it is not for the squeamish. There was no putting the patient to sleep. They were held down, or bound, or perhaps dulled with whatever the local plants could offer. And then the surgeon went to work on the living scalp and skull. Some scraped away the bone, layer by layer, with a sharp-edged stone, grinding a hole through the skull a little at a time. Some cut a series of small holes in a circle and joined them up. Some carved 4 straight lines into a square and lifted the piece of bone out. It could take a long time. The patient was awake for a great deal of it. And still, they lived. Try to be the patient, just for a moment. You are lying on the ground, your head held fast between someone's knees. Strong hands pin your arms and your legs. The pain in your skull is already beyond bearing. That is the whole reason you agreed to this. And now you feel the first scrape of stone against bone. A deep, grinding pressure you do not so much hear as feel through your entire head, on and on, as the healer works, pausing to wipe the blood away and bends to scrape again. There is no passing out. There is no mercy of sleep. There is only the grinding and the ring of your people's faces around you in the firelight, and the desperate hope that when the little door in your head is finally opened, the thing that has been tormenting you will leave through it. That was surgery for most of human history, and people chose it, willingly. Which tells you exactly how unbearable the alternative must have been. But the skull was only the beginning, because ancient humans could fix a great deal more than a broken head. Take a broken bone. Snap your thigh bone today, and it is a manageable injury. A hospital will pin it, and you will walk again. But in the deep past, a broken leg was often a death sentence. Not because the break itself killed you, but because it made you helpless. You could not hunt. You could not run. You could not flee a predator or keep up with your moving band. In the wild, a large animal with a broken leg simply dies. And yet, in the fossil record, again and again, we find the bones of ancient humans with old fractures that have completely healed, set straight, knitted back together strong again. And that simple fact is one of the most moving things in all of archaeology. Because a broken femur that healed means that for weeks and weeks, while that person could do nothing at all, somebody else stayed with them. Somebody carried them to safety. Somebody brought them food and water. Somebody protected them and waited and cared for them until they could stand again. A healed bone is the fingerprint of compassion. It is the oldest evidence we have that human beings look after each other. And it may be the truest mark of civilization there is. But they did more than just wait. They actively set the bone. Ancient healers learned to pull a broken limb straight, to bind it with splints of wood or bark or reeds, and to hold it still while it healed. We have found the splinted limbs of Egyptian mummies, the wood and the bandages still in place after thousands of years. This is real orthopedic medicine, older than the pyramids. And they went further still, as far as cutting a limb clean off. Amputation, to save a life from a mangled limb or a spreading rot, is one of the most dangerous operations there is. The shock, the blood loss, and the infection can all kill on their own. For a long time, we assumed such a thing was far beyond Stone Age people. We were wrong. On the island of Borneo, deep in a cave, archaeologists found the skeleton of a young person whose lower left leg had been amputated, cleanly, deliberately, skillfully, back when they were a child, and the bone had healed. This person went on to live for another 6 to 9 years after losing the leg, cared for by their community on steep and brutal jungle ground. That operation happened around 31,000 years ago. 31,000. Someone that long ago knew how to take a limb off without killing the patient. How to manage the blood, the wound, the pain. And someone else carried and fed and loved that child for years afterward. It is by far the oldest known operation of its kind, and it quietly rewrote what we believed ancient humans were capable of. Then there are wounds. The cuts, the gashes, the punctures that would not stop bleeding. And here ancient humans were startlingly inventive. They learned to close a wound. They stitched skin together with needles of bone and thread of sinew or plant fiber. And in some parts of the world, they used something even more astonishing. They used ants. A healer would hold the edges of a gash together and press a large biting ant against it and let the ant clamp its jaws down through both sides of the skin. Then they would twist the ant's body off and leave the head behind, its jaws locked shut like a living staple. A row of ant heads holding a wound closed. It worked. And to stop the bleeding, when pressure was not enough, they reached for fire. Cauterization. Pressing something burning hot against a wound to sear it shut. Agonizing beyond words, but effective, sealing torn flesh and blood vessels in an instant. They packed wounds with things we now know were genuinely medicinal. Honey, which kills bacteria and which we still use on stubborn wounds in hospitals today. Certain molds and mud that fought infection long before anyone knew what infection was. And do not imagine their tools as blunt and crude either. The sharpest of them were made of obsidian, volcanic glass, chipped to an edge so fine it can be a single molecule thick, sharper than the finest surgical steel we can make today. A handful of surgeons in the modern world still choose obsidian scalpels for exactly that reason. They slice so cleanly that the wound heals with less scarring. So picture it truly. The healer leaning over you had almost nothing we would recognize as medicine. No gloves, no light, no understanding of the germs about to pour into the cut. And yet the blade in their hand could have been keener than anything in a gleaming operating theater today. Which brings us to the two great enemies every one of these operations was really fighting. Pain and infection. First, the pain. With no modern anesthetic, how do you cut into someone who can feel everything? The honest answer is that a great deal of ancient surgery was simply endured, bitten through, screamed through, with the patient held down by many hands. But ancient people were not helpless against pain either. They reached into the natural world and found its most powerful tools. The opium poppy, whose sap is the origin of the strongest painkillers we still use. The coca leaf chewed in the Andes, whose numbing power would one day give us local anesthetic. Cannabis, henbane, mandrake. Alcohol, wherever it could be brewed. Willow bark, quietly containing the same chemical as the aspirin in your cupboard. They could not switch pain off the way we can. But they had learned, plant by plant, how to blunt its edge. And second, the enemy they could not even see. Infection. They had no concept of bacteria, no germ theory, no understanding that invisible living things were the reason a clean-looking cut could turn black and kill you 3 days later. And yet, incredibly, some of their remedies worked anyway. That honey really did stop bacteria. Some of the molds they pressed into wounds contained natural antibiotics. We have even found traces of antibiotic compounds in the bones of ancient peoples, absorbed from their food and medicine, thousands of years before we discovered penicillin. And then there were the maggots. A wound full of maggots looks like the end. But certain fly larvae eat only dead, rotting flesh and leave the living tissue clean and healthy. And some ancient healers, seeing that a wriggling wound somehow healed better, deliberately used them. It is still, occasionally, a real medical treatment today. None of this, of course, always worked. For every healed skull and every mended bone, there were others who did not make it, who bled out, whose wounds turned black and septic, or who simply could not survive the shock of the pain. Ancient surgery was terrifying precisely because it was a gamble, every single time, with a living person on the ground. But that is exactly what makes the survivors so astonishing. Every healed wound we dig up is a small, hard-won victory, snatched from pain and blood and an invisible enemy no one could see, by people working almost blind, with almost nothing, and winning anyway, far more often than they had any right to. So who were these people? Who picked up the stone blade and cut into a screaming friend? They were the healers, the medicine men and women. In every ancient band, there was someone who held the knowledge. Which plant dulls pain, how to set a bone, when to cut and when to wait. Knowledge gathered over countless lifetimes and passed down by word of mouth, mixed with ritual and prayer and magic. Because to them, healing the body and fighting the spirits were the same job. They were doctor and priest at once. And to lie down and let one of them open your body with a piece of rock took a kind of trust we can barely imagine. The total, desperate trust of one human being placing their life in the hands of another. And someone had to be the very first. Somewhere, unimaginably long ago, a human being knelt beside another who was dying. And instead of only grieving or praying or walking away, they did something no animal had ever done. They decided to interfere, to reach into a living body on purpose and try to change what was happening inside it. That single staggering idea that a life running out can be reached and held and pulled back by human hands is the seed from which all of medicine grew. And it was planted in the dirt, in the firelight, with a sharpened stone. And that, in the end, is the real heart of this grim and bloody story. Step back from the drilled skulls and the ant-stitched wounds and the burning irons, and look at what is really happening. One human being is in agony and is going to die, and another human being refuses to let that happen. Picks up a tool, uses everything their people have ever learned, and tries, against the pain, against the infection, against the terrifying odds, to reach into a broken body and pull a life back from the edge. That is not savagery. That is the exact opposite. It is one of the most beautiful things our species has ever done. Because the will to heal, to fix each other, to sit with the sick, to carry the injured, to try, is as old as we are. Every hospital, every operating theater, every surgeon scrubbing in, every nurse at a bedside, every painkiller and every stitch is the direct descendant of that first ancient healer, crouched in the firelight, doing their frightening best with a sharpened stone. And here is the part that should stay with you. You are almost certainly going to be there one day. At some point in your life, you will very likely lie down on a table, frightened, and let a person you have only just met cut your body open, stop your pain, and put you back together. And you will trust them completely to do it. That trust is not modern. It is one of the oldest bonds we have. When you feel it, that strange, total faith that another human being will take your broken body and try with everything they know to save it, you are feeling something a trepanned patient felt 7,000 years ago, lying in the firelight, looking up at the one person who might be able to help. We have far better tools now, cleaner hands, kinder drugs. But the thing itself, one human trying to heal another and one human trusting them to try, that has not changed at all. It is where medicine began. And it began with the nerve and the love to pick up a stone and try to save a life. Thanks for watching. If you like the questions most people are too squeamish to ask, subscribe and stick around, because next time we are digging into another strange, forgotten corner of the world of ancient humans.